Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. As part of the Hatch series, artist Cheryl Derricotte presents The Wolf and the Wheat with special guests, award-winning chef and author Tanya Holland of Brown Sugar Kitchen and renowned chef Brenda Buenviaje of Brenda's French Soul Food. The Hatch is a program series curated by re.riddle for the launch of Villa San Francisco, a new cultural institution that reimagines the original concept of villas by advancing beyond the conventional artist in residency. It aims to lead a future-driven dialogue between artists and communities. Inspired by the mission to foster, support, and advance artistic and cultural communities, re.riddle has comprised a program of micro-residencies that include performances, interviews, and panel conversations. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Cheryl, Tanya, and Brenda, and I'll be doing the introductions right now. Let's meet our speakers. Cheryl Derricotte is a visual artist, and her favorite mediums are glass and paper. Originally from Washington, D.C., she lives and makes art in San Francisco. She has an extensive background in the arts and community development. Cheryl holds the Master of Fine Arts from California Institute of Integral Studies and a Master of Regional Planning from Cornell University and a BA in Urban Affairs from Barnard College, Columbia University. Recent awards include the Vermont Studio Center Residency, a Tana Paper Machine Residency in New Orleans, San Francisco Individual Artist Commission, and many, many more. She was the emerging artist at the Museum of African Diaspora, and she received a DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities National Endowment for the Arts Artist Fellowship Grant. Cheryl is an active thought leader in the arts. She serves as the secretary, also known as the Minister of Information, for 3.9 Art Collective, a group of Black artists who live and make art in San Francisco. She's also the Chief Mindfulness Officer of Crooks, a nationwide cooperative of Black artists working at the intersection of art and technology through immersive storytelling. Cheryl is the creator of Society of Brave Artists, an interview series on Instagram highlighting contemporary political art. The Instagram handle is Society of Brave Artists. To learn more about her work, visit Cheryl at her studio, and I believe that the post will be on the chat. You can access her website there. Next, we have Brenda Buenviaje. She's a chef and co-owner of Brenda's French Soul Food in San Francisco. Chef Brenda grew up on the west bank of New Orleans, Louisiana, in a little town called Harvey. As a girl, she spent much of her time trapping crawfish in the canals behind her house, crabbing in nearby Lafitte, picking wild berries, gathering pecans, and fishing on the local bayous along the Gulf Coast on her family's boat. Upon graduating from Louisiana State University with a BFA in painting and drawing, Brenda decided to pursue her creative passion and begin cooking in the kitchens of New Orleans. Within a few years, she found a natural fit at Mike's on the Avenue, creating fusion cuisine, and was quickly promoted to chef de cuisine. In 1997, Brenda moved to San Francisco, and at the age of 29, landed her first executive chef position at the notable fusion pioneer, Oritalia. While there, she garnered much positive attention. 3 stars in the SF Examiner, 3 stars in SF Magazine, and a listing among the top 5 bold newcomers in the New York Times among her many accolades. She has twice been invited to cook at the James Beard House in New York City. In 2007, Brenda decided to open up her own place, serving her interpretation of French soul food in a casual atmosphere. From day one, the response has been overwhelming, and her website also is listed in the chat. Last, definitely but not least, is Tanya Holland. Acclaimed for inventive take on modern soul food, as well as comfort classics, Tanya Holland is the executive chef owner of the internationally renowned and beloved Brown Sugar Kitchen restaurant located in Oakland, California. The author of Brown Sugar Kitchen Cookbook and New Soul Cooking, Holland completed the 15th season of Top Chef on Bravo and was the host and soul food expert on Food Network's Melting Pot, and appears on the new HBO Max show, Selena and Chef, featuring Selena Gomez. So Holland appears on the episode running on August 27th, so I believe that you can access it now on HBO Max. She's a frequent contributing writer and chef to the James Beard Foundation, and Brown Sugar Kitchen has received multiple Michelin Bib Gourmand awards. She's an in-demand public speaker and lecturer who frequently leads the conversation on inclusion and equity in the hospitality industry. She's appeared in many, many lauded national television shows. I'm going to only list a few. There's many more that you can access on her website, such as The Today Show, The Talk, CBS Morning, VH1 Soul Cities, Bay Area Check Please locally, as well as she was a featured judge on Food Network's Iron Chef and PBS The Great American Chef's Tour. Holland has contributed to articles to various national magazines and other publications such as Sunset, Food and Wine, Wine Enthusiast was featured in New York Times, the Oprah magazine, O, Wall Street Journal, and again, many more. She has served as the president of the prestigious Les Dames d'Escoffier San Francisco chapter. The city of Oakland declared June 5th, 2012 as Tanya Holland Day. And in 2013, former Mayor Jean Quan gave her a key to the city, and she was awarded California Chef and Restaurateur of the Year by the California Tourism Board. Having been appointed as a culinary diplomat by the United States Foreign Service Department for Tours in Kazakhstan and Mexico, Holland has also taught classes in France for gastronomic travelers. She holds a BA in Russian language and literature from the University of Virginia and a Grand Diplôme from the La Vahan École de Cuisine in Burgundy, France. She began her restaurant career as assistant manager at Cornelia Street Cafe, Café Raquel, and No Smoking restaurants. She's trained with Michelin Restaurant de la Madou, Le Costier in the island of Porqueros, France. I'm sorry, I'm butchering it. And many more famous restaurants. She worked for 2 years under celebrity chef Bobby Flay at Mesa Grill, as well as many local restaurants in the Bay Area and around the United States. We are honored to have Tanya, Brenda, and Cheryl speaking with today. And to kick us off, I'm going to hand it over to Cheryl to tell us a little bit more about her project, The Wolf and the Wheat.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you to Chefs Brenda and Chef Tanya for joining us today. Let me start by offering gratitude to Villa San Francisco, our friends at the French Consulate, and the French American Cultural Society for this opportunity. I don't think we can overstate enough how amazing it is that they have invested in a residency program, a beautiful physical space for artists to come in and make work. And I have just had a wonderful week in micro residency here. And thank you very much for this opportunity. Candace, thanks to you for including me in your curatorial vision for the Hatch series and this kickoff to Villa San Francisco. When Candace and I first talked, she explained what she was doing with artists, that there was a desire to have artwork and conversations that would be innovative and transdisciplinary. We were all making the shift from thinking about having a physical art show in the gallery at the French Consulate to what could be more engaging online and through programming. So we had a Zoom, of course, because that's how everything is happening. We had a Zoom. She looked at my work and I said, well, now that you see what I do you think I'm the right fit? And she said, oh yeah, I think so, because I want some artists that will complicate the conversation. And I said, oh, I love that. Let me write it down, because that's what I do. I complicate conversations. And so she asked me where I thought I might go, given everything we discussed. And I said, you know, I am just getting a hit on Thomas Jefferson. I just loud and clear, Thomas Jefferson is coming through. So give me a few weeks and let me see where I end up. And she said, okay. So I went away and started thinking about how to do work on Thomas Jefferson that would both fit her curatorial vision and also have bearing on where we are as a society today. And so a couple of things came up for me. First off, my mother's maiden name was Jefferson. And so her family came from a small mountain town called Withville, Virginia. And she always wanted to prove that we were related to Thomas Jefferson. And unfortunately, she didn't live long enough to fulfill her dream of this retirement project of Proven that we actually somehow traced back to Monticello. Now, I confess I'm not as interested in doing the genealogical research as my mother was, but as I've dived into this project, I do think mommy might have been onto something, because I see a lot of last names that clearly tie in to my family history and geography. So for this particular project, I settled on one quote that Thomas Jefferson used more than once in his correspondence and dialogue with people. He talks about the wolf, and the wolf is his metaphor for the institution of slavery. And so you kind of see over my shoulder, I made a little gallery wall here at the villa so people could see the work, and Thomas Jefferson is looking at us, and so is the wolf. But I completed 2 works on paper. The first is a triptych that depicts Jefferson at about the age he was when he was in France and when he first started his relationship with Sally Hemings. He was about 3 times her age at the time. Additionally, I have the quote about the wolf. And the quote, to just paraphrase quickly, says, but as it is, we have the wolf by the ear. It's neither safe to let him go nor to hold him. Justice is in one scale and self-preservation is in the other. And so, you know, clearly through this quote, Jefferson understood the economic nature of preserving slavery, the self-preservation, as well as the fact that there was some idea about justice, whether he was willing to extend that justice to people of African descent in his lifetime. He was not, but he certainly was conscious of the fact that the institution of slavery was highly problematic, to say the least. And so this quote shows up in his correspondence with John Holmes about the Missouri Compromise, an example. And the title also references wheat. And that was sort of my avenue into the innovative question that the curatorial vision wanted to explore. Part of the Thomas Jefferson, let me just say, talk about a complex human. Let's just go there. He somehow thought he might innovate the plantation. And so he started growing wheat and was very interested in like creating almost a factory to manufacture wheat. And he has these drawings and all these journals about how he could make wheat processing better and faster. And this would, you know, separate him from cotton. Part of, you know, the sort of plantation history is that cotton grew much better in the deep South, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, than it did in the more near north south of Virginia. You know, the primary cash crop was tobacco in Virginia. And so when Jefferson got all caught up in this wheat, I was like, wow, that's very interesting. And a lot of it also played into his time in France and his love affair with all things French food, including the bread. So that's how my project came to be. And so it's 2 distinct pieces, a triptych that deals with images of Jefferson, the wolf, and Monticello with the wheat growing behind it. And then a separate artwork that is just the actual quote that Jefferson used to use, and the wolf. So it's the wolf and the wheat, and then the smaller work is the wolf and the scale, referencing the scale of justice. The pieces are connected with a background wallpaper, and in the center of the wallpaper is actually the image of wheat. So at this point, I am gonna turn to ask some questions of our panelists. Basically, we will start with Chef Brenda, and then we'll go to Chef Tanya, and then we'll open it up at the end for just any questions that you all may have or any other comments, and just keep it kind of, you know, free form for everyone. So Brenda, would you start by telling us about your family history in Louisiana?
Sure. My father was a Filipino immigrant, and my mom was half Filipino, half what I would say is New Orleans Creole. She was that whole melting pot of, French, Sicilian, little German, all of it. And then, so I'm 3/4 Filipino, 1/4, I'd say Creole just out of convenience, but probably that part of my ancestry is mostly French Cajun. I know on my grandmother's side, that ancestry goes as far back as probably French who came down and settled the Cajun area from Nova Scotia. So that part runs deep. But I grew up in a household where, we'd have gumbo on one day and pancit on the next day. So it's very diverse and very unique, especially in New Orleans, even though New Orleans, South Louisiana, is the home of the oldest Filipino settlement in North America. There weren't a lot of Filipinos then, especially with me growing up. So it was complicated, rich, and interesting.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that I found fascinating. I didn't realize that there had been a Filipino community in Louisiana since like the 1700s.
Right. So yeah, I think it was called Little Manila. And from what I remember reading about, the town was settled by actual, they were probably slaves who jumped ship and went out to the bayous and settled in this area it was basically uninhabitable. But, being islanders, they knew how to work that land, and shrimp were plentiful down there. So that's kind of how that happened. And then, over the years, those settlers in the deep, deep bayous, Filipinos, started to commingle with the rest of the greater community there, like further adding to that melting pot. I don't know if my Filipino lineage goes that far back to Little Manila, but essentially that's how I came about. My dad was a merchant marine, and he saw my mom sitting in the yard one day and was like, oh, she kind of looks like me. I'm going to go introduce myself because she's half Filipina. And that's just kind of how I got started.
Nice. And can you tell us about your earliest memories of cooking? Were there key players in your family that you grew up with cooking or you remember?
Oh, yeah. And I don't know if it was specific to my family or maybe it's just a New Orleans thing. Like cooking down there, food is like a religion. Like everybody cooks. My mom cooked, my grandma cooked. My grandma was part Sicilian. She made the best spaghetti and meatballs I just have this childhood memory of that specific dish. She spoke a little French. Apparently my mom, my great grandma, mostly communicated in French. And I swear the woman, she lived on baguette and cafe au lait. But yeah, it wasn't like there was one key player. It was just kind of it was immersive. Like everybody cooked. And Filipino food, Creole food, all of it.
That's it. One of the things that's been interesting to me about this project, so while I've been at the villa, I've really been diving into the research on the Hemings family and doing more reading about them. And what brought us all together really is the legacy of James Hemings, because Thomas Jefferson took his enslaved chef with him to France on his first trip and had him trained as a French chef because he knew he could pay him a lot less in France, even though France, didn't have slavery. He had to pay him a little bit, but it was probably like the equivalent of a quarter on every dollar that he would have had to pay a white French chef. And he knew when they came home, it was back to slavery in Virginia. So he could just have French food at the plantation. And so what has been fascinating in learning about James is how much he influenced what we all consider soul food today or Southern cooking, you know. And I know your restaurant's moniker is French soul food. So can you talk a little bit about how you envision soul food and, you know, what your particular mixtape is on this cuisine?
Mixtape, that's good. Yeah, so when I decided to name our first restaurant Brenda's French Soul Food, it was sort of on a whim. I didn't think it would take off the way it did. And it was an expression that a friend of mine had used to describe my food once. And I was like, that's cool, that's interesting. And when I first opened the restaurant, my intent really was to air more on the French side of things. That was back in 2007. But what happened was this was soon after Katrina. I opened and I kind of had a mix of like some bistro-y type dishes, like a salad niçoise and those sorts of things. But I also was like, you know what, I'm going to do gumbo too. And I'm going to take beignets and I'm going to stuff them and do all this other crazy stuff. But I had these people who were, you know, missing home. They were displaced from Katrina. And then also at the time, New Orleans was just getting a ton of attention because of that great tragedy. Mm-hmm. And people really wanted the New Orleans food, the Southern food. So I was like, okay. So I scratched all the French stuff and just gave the people what they wanted. And I kind of allowed that to go to that, for that to happen. And, you know, it all kind of came together at once, like, oh yeah, you know, French soul food, it really is basically like the definition of Creole, you know, New Orleans Creole cuisine. And that's what the people wanted. So, and this is where we are now.
Excellent, thank you. I'm gonna turn to Chef Tanya for a minute and get her in here. Tanya, can you tell us a bit about your personal relationship to France and cooking? We were hearing a little bit of that in your bio, so please tell us more.
Sure. I just want to comment on Brenda's comment, like, you got to give the people what they want, right? That's just the bottom line. Like, my people want chicken and waffles. That's what I gave them. Yeah, so I started studying French in 9th grade. And my teacher was very dynamic. She was amazing. I don't know. Uh-oh, I just lost you guys.
Oh, we see you and can hear you.
Okay. This happens to me on Zoom. I'm not that, there we go. Okay. I like seeing you though. So she was going around the room teaching us how to say when our birthday was. And I said, my birthday is July 14th. And she was like, oh, Bastille Day. Oh my God, it's a French holiday. And like, it was the most, you know, incredible thing. So I was like, wow, there's a country that celebrates my birthday. It must be amazing. And so I just became a Francophile right then and studied through college, 8 years. But I really didn't think of the food aspect for a long time. It wasn't until after college when I started really working more in restaurants and then in New York City and discovering that some of the most revered restaurants were French-based and the chefs were French-trained. And I made a decision that I wanted to be a restaurateur. And I'd always wanted to live and work in France. I wanted to use my language. Sorry about this frog. And then so I found a program in Burgundy, La Varenne, and I went there and I worked in exchange for cooking classes. So we did some translating, assisting chefs. But funny, just to backtrack, I did attend the University of Virginia and I didn't, you know, my aunt had been there. My aunt attended University of Virginia. I got there and, you know, I learned right away, just like Thomas Jefferson was so revered. He's this amazing architect. He was a Renaissance man. It was like Thomas Jefferson. And it was exhausting. And I didn't really think about it. You know, I'm 20 something years old. I didn't go to Monticello. You know, I just like kind of zoned out on that part of it. But then for my 10-year college reunion, I was cooking by that time. And I was asked to do a cooking demo and to, you know, just like do some research on Thomas Jefferson. I did, and I was just like, oh my goodness, he was a Renaissance man. He was complicated, as you said, and you mentioned the I forgot the word you used about the you know, sort of I think he didn't want to, you know, I mean, he knew that slavery wasn't a good thing, but he also didn't want to give up his lifestyle. When I finally visited Monticello a few years ago, it was just evident the lifestyle that he had created for himself, you know, and I went to that, and I'm jumping around a little bit, I'm sorry. I went to the Sally Hemings exhibit and had read more about James Hemings, and I just felt this affinity with James Hemings, you know, with my, you know, my journey, cooking in France. And I wanted to just dive into it, you know, his story. And so, I don't know, it just, for me, food and culture is just the way that I express myself in this world, you know, it's just, I can't even explain it.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm curious, you know, you said give the people what they want. Did you grow up in a family that did chicken and waffles, or were there other sort of cooking styles in your family that you can point to, or key players, as I call them?
Yeah, I mean, both my mom and dad cooked, and they started hosting a dinner club they called the Gourmet Club when I was 7, that went on for 20 years. 6 couples, once a month they met, and it was 3 Black couples and 3 white couples for 20 years. You know, this is like the mid 70s to the mid 90s. So
incredible.
I looked at it as like they were mavericks, you know. Now, I mean, once I was more aware in my late 20s and early 30s, that's as diverse as the community was. But that was significant. And they cooked soup to nuts, different cuisines from around the world, and also regional American cuisine. So I grew up with this big repertoire of, you know, from matzo ball soup to chicken cacciatore to German potato salad, you know, in addition to my mom's from northern Louisiana, Shreveport. So, you know, gumbo, fried chicken, cornbread, and my dad's from Virginia. And so, you know, some of that influence. And I got to school, and none of my friends, you know, they were eating mac and cheese out of a box and hot dogs and tuna fish out of a can. And, you know, not that I didn't eat some of that, but that was also what, you know, motivated me to cook, but also the hospitality part of it was really also my passion. Yeah.
Right.
So chicken and waffles, I discovered when I moved to California, and when I opened my first restaurant, I opened a year after Brenda, in 2008. I had fried chicken on the menu, and I bought one waffle maker. I was like, oh, you know what? I'll just do a waffle. Somebody might want this. And then I've just,
it became big. Yes. Yeah, that's great. And then can you tell us a little bit about your definition of modern soul food, and if there's French influences in there, or what's your mixtape of how you cook at your restaurant?
Yeah, it's just a culmination of all of my experience, from family cooking to training in France. Before I left, I hadn't seen a lot of soul food restaurants really elevated in the way that I want it, where the food service and the room were all at a certain level. And so I wanted to bring back the French technique into the cuisine, or the, you know, and I mean, for modern French, I think, you know, there's so many people doing different innovative things right now. For me, it's all about sustainability, local and organic whenever possible. That's really what I strive to do, and just to cook with the best possible ingredients that I can, and to cook consistently and with integrity. And so, you know, my flavors aren't muddled. It's like sort of what you see is what you get. You expect what you expect from the dish that's listed. My work has turned more into, you know, impacting change in my industry, and you know, the leadership the leadership stuff, work that I do, and some of the media work that I do. Again, it's a means to an end, though, to really like lift up our genre of cuisine, because it's been seen as sort of, you know, I don't know, not as respected as other, you know, other cuisines. So.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you. You raised a great point about, you know, how restaurants can elevate cuisine in the broader society. You know, I grew up in DC, so B. Smith's was huge when
In New
the
York.
restaurant,
Yeah.
yeah, in New York as well. And, you know, I have traveled to New Orleans. I want to say I've been to New Orleans 3 times. And the first time I went, which was probably almost 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to eat at Miss Leah's. You know, it was like if you didn't go to Dookie Chase, you just hadn't eaten in New Orleans at that time. And so, you know, question for both of you, I'm wondering if there were like iconic chefs or iconic restaurants that you feel like sort of played in your imagination and your cooking style. So either one of you that wants to start.
I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of meeting Leah Chase when I was a young chef. And of course, I was unable to speak because I was just so taken by her. But I never actually got to cook with her, but just her as an icon and a figure in New Orleans, especially post-Katrina, I think she held everybody up. Just through her example and her hard work and her grit. Probably my other chef that I really admired would be Edna Lewis. Her writing, first of all, is just beautiful, but the way that she chose to write her cookbook, The Taste of Country Cooking, was really, it really spoke to how I grew up, very farm to table. Not that we didn't go to the grocery store, but like my mom always kept the garden, and we had a fishing boat, and we really ate seasonally in many ways that you just didn't see very often, especially in the 70s and the 80s. So I loved the fact that Edna Lewis spoke about how she cooked Southern food. She was very, like Tanya was saying, like she was very, because I think she was her French, there was French influence, but the way that she elevated the Southern food and how she spoke about it in this really inclusive way. Mm-hmm. And then I also, I think for me, just growing up and having the privilege of cooking in New Orleans, which is, almost 60% Black, I got to work side by side with the real community of Black cooks. And I couldn't name any of them specifically, but, just having that peer group certainly influenced the way I cook in especially Southern cuisine. And that's definitely something I've really missed. And I didn't realize it until recently, but something that I really missed since leaving the South.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I share those influences. When I returned from cooking school in 1991 from France, my parents said, "Oh, we're going to drive to Shreveport to see your grandmother." And I insisted, I said, "Well, then we must go to New Orleans. I've never been, and I've heard about this restaurant, Dookie Chase. We must go." And they indulged me, and we went there, and I met Leah, and, I had my resume to hand to her to, maybe work for her. And she just like insisted that she's like, no, you this, you go back up north and you learn from, those folks. But she was so warm and just like, like another grandmother. She just said, "I'm so proud of you." And she gave me just indelible advice, just like, read everything. You're going to get critiqued a lot in this business. Just take it and work with it. Like, don't take it personally. Like, just all things I'd never, join associations, things I'd never thought of. And I will say some of my first cookbooks, Edna Lewis, A Taste of Country, that was amazing. So influential, the way she broke down the seasons. And another first cookbook that I was telling someone about the other day was Lulu's table. Lulu Tempier from Domaine Tempier in Provence. I did a stage in Provence on the island of Porquerolles, and that, just that region is, and it, it shares, it's like a sun belt like the South, so there's some similarities that just really, I just love the Mediterranean cooking, fresh, just simple but straightforward cooking.
Mhm.
I love hearing about the diverse influences that Brenda and Tanya have in terms of growing up, and how they not only complement but add tension to each other, and how they influence and shape the way you think about food today. So I love how complex as Thomas Jefferson. I'd also like to hear about Cheryl's cooking influences. What inspired you? Just tell us more about your background and personal history there.
Oh, thank you. I actually grew up with great grandparents into adulthood. So on my mother's side of the family, my great grandmother lived to be 100, and she died in my 20s. And on my father's side of the family, my great grandmother lived to be in her late 80s, also died in the 20s. And so my mother's side, as you heard, is like the Virginia side. So my great grandmother came from Virginia and cooked things like apple dumplings. I grew up eating apple dumplings. That was like our special holiday treat. Also, there was some cuisine that we used to eat that, I'll just say it like I used to tell my family, why are we Black hillbillies? Because we would eat these dishes of like sauerkraut in a buttered corningware dish with bacon slices on top. I mean, it wasn't Thanksgiving if you didn't have the buttered sauerkraut, And as a child, you're just kind of like, I'm not sure where this is coming from, and this kind of, German settlement from West Virginia, because Southwest Virginia and West Virginia were very close, And so there were those influences of cooking on my mother's side of the family. And then on my father's side of the family, my great grandmother was from a very small town in North Carolina. And so, my great grandfather, that her second husband that she lived with the longest and stayed married to until they died, was from South Carolina. So she cooked what we all might consider low country, So from her, I learned things like how to make Swiss steak in the oven. And she was a great baker as well, but I was kind of too young to get it. She used to, before she died, she went back to making handmade clover leaf rolls, and we were all delighted because she had been very excited by biscuits in a can, and we were not. So it was really great to sort of watch her at the end of her life go back to baking and shaping like these clover leaf rolls in muffin tins. And it was just a wonder to me to sit in her kitchen and watch her do that. So, I kind of had, and then because I was from DC, there's such a huge Chesapeake Bay influence. Brenda mentioned like the shrimp and the crab, that is the classic DC, Maryland, Virginia, DMV diet of seafood, So there was definitely a certain amount of Eastern Shore as my family had migrated as well.
Thank you for sharing, Cheryl. So let's segue to back to the wolf and the wheat and talk about each of your relationships. And again, a question to all of you. Well, Cheryl, as we know, is so specifically more to Brenda and Tanya, but what is your relationship to the visual arts?
Mm-hmm.
I'll speak to that. I actually, in my mom painted. Like, I just kind of came from a creative family, but I got my BFA in painting and drawing from LSU a million years ago. But like you said in the intro, I started cooking, and I continued to cook because it's just really where my heart is. But when you pose this question, it just opened this huge can of worms for me, because I realized that, I had not been defining myself as an artist, but maybe as a creative person. And then I took a look around my restaurants and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm like in the process of creating, visualizing, and designing 24/7. And when I shared some of the stuff that I have in my restaurants with you, it just opened up a whole nother avenue of just defining myself as a creative person. So thank you for that. Can we show some of the photos now? Yeah. So where I'm standing right now in San Francisco at Polk Street, my original location, I'm actually standing in front of the first mural that I conceptualized. The building's over 100 years old, and I wanted to, I'll be showing it. I wanted to, there it is. I wanted to make it feel like it was something that was unearthed in the restaurant because the building is so old. And so it was painted to look like an advertisement that had been found accidentally during our demo work. And, you know, I wanted to tie in, you know, the product that we're using, the écrevisse, you know, like French word for, you know, crawfish or shellfish. And the Buenviaje is actually an homage to my last name, Buenviaje. So it kind of started with a theme there. And then from there, with my partnership with Mural Arts, who I adore, the husband and wife team based in Potrero Hill, we went on to do this one. And Brenda Seymour actually designed and executed this one mostly on her own. And we thought, hey, let's do a pig this time. This is at Brenda's Meat and Three. And for the third mural, which is based in Oakland, I actually laid that design out myself because I just love produce and the way produce looks, and I wanted it to feel like a vintage seed packet, and I wanted to feature, you know, vegetables. The Holy Trinity is a reference to the onions, bell pepper, celery that most Cajun Creole cuisine starts with. And this one was actually for the final mural. We actually ended up painting it on burlap. Can you go to the next one? And to emulate like a seed sack. Oh no, the one prior to that. There we go. This is me with the artists, the Mural Arts team. They're just so great. Highly recommend them. But this one's painted on burlap to kind of emulate, you know, a seed sack, you know, in reference to the whole like farm theme. And this one is in Oakland. That's our latest one. And then they did one more piece for me, which is the next one. And that one is on our patio, Meat and Three. And it's a visual representation of what an actual meat and three is. What I realized being out here on the West Coast, a lot of people are not familiar with blue plate specials or what, you know, a meat and three is. And basically you go in, you choose your meat and your three sides. So I was just trying to, it's an opportunity to decorate and educate at the same time. And that's also by Mural Arts. And then I had, you know, I partnered with a few other people to, you know, enhance, you know, the spaces that we're taking up. And here's the next one. I'm trying to remember what the next one was. Oh yeah, my art director, Myrna Newcomb, and I conceptualized and designed this one together. And this is me paying an homage to the, you know, hot donut signs in the South, especially, you know, the Krispy Kreme hot donut. But I thought, hey, let's do hot beignets, you know, like, again, like, let's bring something from the past, but kind of represent this cool new thing that we're doing now. And this stays lit during business hours in Oakland because you can always get a hot beignet in Oakland as long as we're open. I love this one. And the Thomas Swan Sign Company actually executed that one for us. And then also in Oakland, we had the pleasure of working with the Henry Defoe design group. And what they did for us is they created a iron gate planter. And I love this. This is actually the border to our outdoor dining area in Oakland. And it is meant to, well, it serves as a boundary, but it's also, you know, it's public art. It was created by local artists, and it's meant to kind of be reminiscent of wrought iron gate artwork that you would find in the French Quarter or in New Orleans. And I think some of these pieces, some of these wrought iron panels were actually found, and they pieced it together with the Corten planters. Yeah, this was something that came out of the whole stress of doing a complete build out. And then when they did finally install it, you could go to the next one. I had the pleasure of, sorry, can we go? Mm-hmm. There we go. Mm-hmm. They were kind enough to dedicate the piece to me. And when I saw this plaque, I was just so moved by it. And it was also grateful that for my one semester of French in college, that I was able to actually read it and understand that, you know, I think this piece was done with a lot of love, and I really appreciated them and the whole gesture. Yeah. And then also what I've been doing, can we go to the next one? Also what I've been doing is working with my son on a YouTube channel. And I know I'm getting ahead a little bit, but it's just one of his mac and cheese images for my YouTube channel.
Thank you. That's great. And Tanya, you have also some images that we should look at if you want to share some images of your restaurant as well. Oh, we're seeing the YouTube channel. And I think we put the link to the YouTube channel in the chat so everyone can see the link to Brenda's YouTube channel as well. Yes, I see it in the chat now. Excellent. Thank you. And thanks to your son too. Appreciate him. And Tanya, you want to take the same question that Candace asked? You're still muted, Tanya. Can you unmute for us? Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry that we didn't send you more photos of the art. So, you know, I've opened 3 locations, and for each location, I have commissioned artists to create work. I studied art history also in college and spent a lot of times visiting museums and working museums when I was a caterer in New York. And I've just always, you know, I love aesthetics. And one of my favorite things about being in the business is creating the environment. And that is through, you know, design, lighting, artwork, music, and all the, you know, all the aspects that create environment, from tabletop ware and everything. And the first art project for the old location of Brown Shirt Kitchen was What's Sweet About West Oakland. And my graphic designer came up with the idea that you know, West Oakland was not known to be a sweet place. It was pretty rough, but the same letters that are in the word West are in the word sweet. And so she thought, you know, she made that little, like, you know, moniker calling it Sweet West Oakland. So I hired Amanda Williams, who was a trained architect, but now a renowned fine artist. She's based in Chicago, and she took photographs. I always loved black and white photography as art and around West Oakland. And we printed them on canvas. Magnolia printers down the street from me printed them with just a little pop of color. And so a few of those pieces actually came to Broadway. We reprinted them on some acoustical material. They're digitized files. So we have that. I also brought one piece from my barbecue place, which was called B-Side. And that artwork was created by April Banks, who is another amazing artist. And she superimposed me into historical photos of the Black cowboys in California. We were paying homage to Black cowboys. And then at my current location, which that's just the exterior photo there, but if you go to the interior photo, you might get a peek of the art. I brought over the images from the old place, as I said, which there you can see them on the left side of the wall, the fish, rice, and green. Those are just, some images. And then I also had another artist create a quilt, and he works with coffee filters, and he's local, Jason Jackson, from North Carolina. And then if you see that divider, that mesh, that's also a local artist. It's made out of a metal, and it's a pattern that's stamped, and that's our semi-private dining room right there, which is now completely lined with takeout containers because that's where we are right now. But I love supporting other artists, and like I said, just all the details that go into selecting that paint color, the light fixtures, and everything that creates the environment.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm mindful of our time, and I want to make sure we have just a few moments if people have any questions. So to sort of bring us home on this conversation, Tanya and Brenda, one of the things that was really great to learn through my research is how James Hemings really influences the way we eat. And so as Brenda foreshadowed, mac and cheese. The reason we all eat mac and cheese is because James Hemings really popularized mac and cheese in America and served it repeatedly at Thomas Jefferson's diplomatic dinners, both in France and also in the US. And you get these references I've found to people discussing, oh, we had this delightful macaroni pie at Jefferson's, and what they're talking about is the mac and cheese. So for everyone today, I want you to know that your special treat for showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning after the Labor Day holiday is that you will get a copy of Brenda's mac and cheese recipe and also Tanya's mac and cheese recipe. And my final question for both of you is, can you talk a little bit about mac and cheese and your relationship to it, and also how wheat shows up in your cooking? So you might start with breadcrumbs or no breadcrumbs on your mac and cheese, because that is often a source of controversy, and other ways that wheat shows up.
Okay, I'll go. Actually, did not grow up eating mac and cheese. If there was mac and cheese, it would show up during the holidays. That was a special dish for groups. And I was trying to think of it. I don't think I've actually experienced boxed mac and cheese until I was living in the dorm. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this girl made this tuna casserole thing. I'm like, I don't know what the hell that is, but I don't want any. But we use boxed mac and cheese sometimes for the kids. The way that wheat shows up for me, it's very specific. It's in our French rolls, it's in our biscuits, it's in our beignets. But coming from Louisiana, growing up, we were a rice and grits family. Like we didn't, there's not a lot of wheat down there because it's mostly, bayou country. Mm-hmm. As far as mac and cheese goes here at my restaurant, again, that's just me giving people what they want. I didn't start off with mac and cheese. And And then once I went down that road, I'm like, okay, I need to make the most inclusive mac and cheese I could possibly make. And what that meant was like not messing with it too much, just like give them something, rich and decadent, but like don't play with it. Don't put any truffle oil, no blue cheese, like just keep it real. So that's what my recipe is.
Nice. And thank you for sharing it with us too.
Sure.
And also on the YouTube channel, the video will be up for people that want to watch the mac and cheese preparation. You can find that on the YouTube channel. And then what about you, Tanya? How does wheat show up? Breadcrumbs and no breadcrumbs on the mac and cheese, all the things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a breadcrumb person. It kind of is my personal preference. And the base of my mac and cheese is a bechamel, one of the mother sauces, that I perfected studying in France. And like Brenda, I don't mess with it too much. I use a white cheddar, I didn't want to get carried away, even though I love so many different kinds of cheeses. And we just stay consistent and keep it that way every now and then, especially kids, they'll want it without the breadcrumbs, and I'm fine with that. But I grew up, eating it, but not like on a regular basis. But as I said, when I went to college and all my friends were eating it out of a box, that inspired me to start, trying to make it from scratch, to share with them.
Yeah, that's great. I actually grew up on both sides of the divide. So my mother and that side of the family would do some breadcrumbs on top of the mac and cheese. But on my father's side of the family, absolutely not. And it was all about sharp cheddar. And I would say out of everybody on today's panel, I'm probably the one that has messed with mac and cheese the most, because once I adopted, a vegan lifestyle, I actually make a mac and cheese now, with a nutritional yeast as the base of the bechamel sauce. And I sub in butternut squash because it really mimics the cubes of sharp cheddar, So I think mac and cheese is such a great dish, and I still tend to reserve it for holidays, because whether you're making the regular version or the vegan version, it can get a little labor intensive. So, I don't do it all the time. So I appreciate both of you keeping it as a staple in your respective restaurants, because people really do enjoy it so much. I am going to see if we have any questions in the chat or through the Q&A. Candace, do you have any questions?
Yeah, we have a great question from Cindy to both the chefs. She says, I find the intersection between food and visual art so interesting, particularly as it deals with identity. Somehow we don't ever refer to chefs as identity chefs in the same way we do with visual artists. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I feel like we do. I guess it's up to the chef and how they define themselves. Certain chefs take the visual part farther than others. For me, I want the food to look good, but I'm not, I would say my plating is not the most artistic as, people who are working with molecular gastronomy and, where it's much more visually sensitive. I really want it to taste great.
I think,
right.
Sorry, just quickly to interrupt. I think the question is more about how visual artists have been categorized as, say, Black American artists or Chinese artists. Do we see that same parallel in the culinary industry?
I think we do. And I think it's, identity politics and food, especially like as someone who's, with chefs and the popularity of chefs has like really, it's kind of out of control, frankly. It comes with a lot of responsibility, and especially now with people, being concerned with cultural appropriation. Like, people are constantly checking each other to make sure that you are qualified to cook that cuisine. I struggle with it myself with this face cooking Southern food. People are like, what? Because like Asian, Southern, like it doesn't equate until they actually, you know, you have to dive a little bit deeper to really understand the identity and, you know, why that person would choose to cook that food. I do think that, you know, people are looking at chefs and thinking about their identity and their social responsibility around how they are bringing another culture or another region to the public.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think does anyone have any other questions? Maybe they might come along, but Cheryl, do you want to say one last few words maybe about the intersections between history, food, and art, and more about, you know, kind of the next steps with your project and how they all interrelate with Tanya and Brenda's experience in personal history?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, let me start by saying thanks again, both to Chef Tanya Holland, also Chef Brenda Buenviaje for joining us today. This has been just a really rich dialogue, and I have been so delighted to just learn more about James Hemings through this project. I think that, you know, kind of that last question about identity, I would say, if anything, you know, in sort of wrapping this up, this legacy of Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, and James Hemings shows how mixed the American family really is. And so to the extent that I always feel like, you know, my artwork is a way of bringing historical images into contemporary dialogues, the opportunity to dive into this work, you know, leading up to the residency and while I was on site, was really an opportunity to have conversations about Charlottesville and understand why we still are seeing the kind of, you know, racial animosity in Charlottesville today as the site of a former huge plantation by a founding father. You know, there's that old saying, don't know your past, don't know your future. And so to the extent that the next phase of this work, you know, out of my research here will allow me to hopefully tell more of James and Sally's story through the visual arts and through metaphor, like the quotes, you know, I'm really looking forward to see where that journey takes us. But I've been really just inspired in hearing both of your stories, Tanya and Brenda, and, you know, delighted to have both of your cuisines. We're so spoiled in the Bay Area when it comes to delicious food to have. And I just want to thank you for your time and your generosity today to let us into both your thoughts and your restaurants and sharing your delicious recipes with us. And also to thank Candace for your curatorial vision. I mean, you just pivoted on a dime from visual art show in real time to, nope, we're doing everything in a virtual space and making it happen. And again, deepest gratitude to our friends at Villa San Francisco, the French Consulate, and the French American Cultural Society. Thank you all for investing and believing in artists.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Villa San Francisco, the French American Cultural Society, Cultural Services of the French Embassy, French Consulate at San Francisco, and the Institut Français. Thank you very much for your time, and we really love this. Thank you.